Mac McFarland. I'm the director of the Center for Contemporary Art and Culture here at PNCA. And it's my amazing pleasure to get to kick off this Connective Conversations Critic and Curator series here tonight with Claire Tancons. The Connective Conversation series is brought to you by the Ford Family Foundation's Visual Arts Program, who operates this series in partnership with the University of Oregon's Architecture and Allied Arts Program. And in the last few years, the Ford Family Foundation has brought in a couple of other partners to help facilitate the program, PNCA included, Reed College, and OCAC as well. And before we get started this evening, I'd really just like to thank Candace Nunn and Carol DeLue for their amazing work with the Ford Family Foundation and all that they do to bring amazing people and funding to the visual arts here in Oregon. And with that, I'd also like to maybe we'll hold the applause till the end of the thanks. And also Kate Waggle, who's here in the audience tonight, who does all of the work with the U of O and facilitating us to bring these speakers. And then finally to Ashley Gibson, who's the assistant director here at the center, who's done so much work in making Claire's time here run smoothly. So we can now thank them. Claire's been on the ground now a couple of days. Have done, I think, about 5 studio visits and more tomorrow down in Eugene before a final day here in Portland. I met Claire about 5 years ago now in Kassel, Germany at the 13th edition of Documenta, where I was with Professor Modou Dieng on a global studios trip, and we had a series of students down there. And Claire and I became fast friends, I feel like. And then she became one of those people that maybe you think of as your conference buddy, that you run into maybe once or twice a year at a conference, you reach out to before a conference in the hopes that she'll be there and so you can catch up on everything. And so when I was asked to start working on one of these Connective Conversation series, Claire was really at the top of my list for that. Not simply because she has been a fierce independent curator working without sort of institutional support for several years, nor is it simply because she was on the curatorial team of the first Prospect Biennial in New Orleans, the Guajing Biennial in 2008, the Cape Town Biennial in 2009, the Gothenburg Biennial in 2013, or her latest work with the Tate Modern. Really, I think Claire came to mind, first of all, because of her interest in masquerades, parading, and the space between ritual and performance, and how that might connect to the visual arts. And I've seen a lot of those things playing out, those overlaps and ideas playing out within cultural institutions and within artist practice around the state of Oregon. So bringing Claire seemed to be a natural fit for this amazing series. And I mean, I could sort of, and a lot of that research that Claire has done really culminated with the exhibition In Mass, Carnival and Performance Art of the Caribbean, which she co-curated with Krista Thompson. And that's been touring to 4 venues so far, including the National Gallery in the Bahamas and also to the National Gallery of the Cayman Islands. And that'll be opening at the Museum of African Diaspora in San Francisco in September of this year. So if you're around the Bay Area in the fall, I would definitely check that out. So, I mean, I could really go on and on about my love for Claire Tancons, and I would just finalize my time here today in my introduction to her to say that she is currently the director of Etc., a civic ritual for Printemps de Septembre in Toulouse, France, and that she has been an amazing person to spend time with here in Oregon. And please help in welcoming Claire Tancons.
Well. Thank you so much, Mac, for such a wonderful, expansive, and generous introduction. Thank you, everyone. I know I have been in the studio with some of you. I may be in the studio with more of you in the upcoming days. So thank you, Mac McFarland, Director of PNCA. Thank you, Ashley Gibson, indeed. Thank you to the Ford Family Foundation for making my trip possible. And my coming to Portland is the second and last stop on a mini tour of the Pacific Northwest. I just came from Seattle, where I was the national juror for the NEDI Arts Award, and likewise conducted a series of studio visits. And the reason why I'm prefacing my talk by situating myself within the region is because indeed, Mac, and you likely were waiting for me to discover it by myself. What I have found indeed with those few 5 visits that you so expertly curated is that indeed there are tremendous overlap between these few artists whom I have met, their practices, their intention and aspirations, and my own within my work. And you will see as I run you through nearly a decade of my curatorial practice, how ritual and performance indeed, and looking for novel ways of presenting them against the backdrop of an artistic context indeed, but also within or still in relationship to the context from whence they originated, has been at the forefront of my interest. And in doing so, it has also been very much about serving these artists whom I felt were not given proper curatorial support in order for their work to unfold in a manner which I thought to be maybe more fitting to their aspirations, for one, but also in a way that I didn't see to be fitting in with regards to the cultural context from whence it originated, but also the various communities for which they professed to do the work. But we will go through this as I go forward with my presentation. Even as I am on the second and last stop for now of my Pacific Northwest mini tour, a region which I really, really do not know very well. Um, I have not been so far away from New Orleans, which is where I came from, to not want to start there. So as you can see with my introductory slide, and in many ways, and maybe this will be for a return visit, I have not quite spent enough time in the region and with its various cultural practitioners and artistic contenders in order to make more of the connections that I see or rather perceive. So the title of my lecture, or rather its subtitle, Circum-Atlantic to Pacific Northwest, is more aspirational than it is yet real. So bear with me. I have still tried to bring to bear the very location where we find ourselves to be together. And of course, what has been so striking to me could have likewise been in New Orleans, but isn't quite the case, even as it is betrayed by what I just said, kind of is betrayed by the screen, the slide on the screen, which I will explain. What has been really, really striking for me, and which is clearly at the center of most cultural conversations that have a strong cultural consciousness, cultural and political consciousness at their core, is of course the presence of the Native American legacy, recovery, and contemporary cultural life, if you will. So what we see on the screen, which is unique to New Orleans, is a Mardi Gras Indian. In the case of this particular practitioner of the Mardi Gras Indian tradition, Victor Harris, aka Big Chief Ayaya, a gentleman who, much like his peers, is, by which I mean Mardi Gras Indians, is of African American descent, and who, through his suit, never call the apparel of a Mardi Gras Indian a costume, for it will be a great insult. His suit bears or embodies the various acts of surrogation that have been pervasive throughout the circum-Atlantic. Act of cultural surrogation embodied within the cultural practices of both Native Americans, the First Nations, as I very much like the Canadian appellation, the First Nations of what became the Americas, and the new populations that were forcibly brought to the Americas, the enslaved Africans. Circum-Atlantic and the notion of surrogation is one which I borrow from Joseph Roach in Cities of the Dead, where he thinks the Americas expansively in terms of all these various fragmented cultural heritages that are characteristically being reenacted in these acts of surrogation within performance. And so, this introductory slide, aspirational, as is my title, is a way to indicate how, even as I have been very much cited in New Orleans within a strong African American community and have done most of my prior and subsequent work from the Caribbean, therefore very much with an African diasporic political consciousness, if you will, I very much see, and indeed including embodied within these acts of surrogative performance, how these various heritages find a way at the forefront of cultural practice and artistic and various artistic forms. So that is for the aspirational subtitle. Now, as concern the notion of roadworks and wandering artworks, I will maybe go to my second slide, likewise aspirational, but to begin to tell the story about the disconnect, even within African American cultural museum officials, the disconnect between museum culture on the one hand and popular cultural movements, if you will. So what you see is a rendering of these various African diasporic performance traditions. To the left, you have a second line, the anniversary parade of the Black Men of Labor, one of the many social ed and pleasure clubs of New Orleans. To the right, you may recognize in his yellow suit Victor Harris, Big Chief Ayaya, who was in the previous slide. In the middle, quite far in the back, you will see a marching band. And then further in the back, you will see other Mardi Gras Indians. And then finally, to the far right of the slide, you will see suits, sound suits that you may recognize as those of Nick Cave, Chicago-based African American artist, who indeed traces the lineage of these works of his down to the Mardi Gras Indians' very own suits. And so this rendering is set against the backdrop of the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which I was given permission by its architect, David Adjei, to top with an umbrella, as you can see in the little logo to the right. This unsolicited and unrealized project is an attempt to do much as what I will do during the talk, which is to again highlight the disconnect between museum culture on the one hand and popular traditions on the other hand, but also through this disconnect, the inability to think quite literally outside of the box, both critically and practically, about other curatorial models through which to curate those contemporary artistic practices that stem of these various cultural traditions, which are not even recognized within those institutions where you might think that they should be. Of course, one of the reasons why I was also excited to imagine what such a processional performance could have looked like against the backdrop of the National Museum of African American History as that repository for this African diasporic memory is first and foremost because of its location on the National Mall. For indeed, Second Lines and Mardi Gras Indians and New Orleans public ceremonial culture is political to the core. Not political in the sense of waving banners and writing slogans, but political in the sense of asserting one presence in public space, in reclaiming the streets, and in quite literally showing off one's color. Something never to be taken for granted, even in a place like New Orleans, where these cultural practices are weekly for 9 months out of 12. So even as the very colorful and spectacular nature of some of the work I do may be distracting, and purposefully so also actually as a covert way of resisting and quite literally hiding one's motif, which are, as I said, otherwise very much rooted within core political assertions of one's presence and right to life. You know, even as this, the one is not to be distracted by these apparels and the spectacular dimension thereof. It all is really the tip of an iceberg, as I like to think of it, the foundations of which, again, are rooted within strong social ties and political awareness within the communities that have upheld these practices. So having said that, and by way of an introduction, I will pause. I moved to New Orleans in almost a decade ago to work on the first edition of Prospect New Orleans, as Mac said. And I was halfway through the end of my research on the modern Carnival traditions of the Americas, and I emphasize on modern. For when one goes through the experience of the Middle Passage and thinks of the Americas, one is de facto within the enterprise of colonization, which is at the core of well, the conquest, of course, and the Enlightenment, and really the project of modernity. So it's very important for me to reframe our thinking of Carnival, certainly in the way in which I think of it and have approached it in my work as a modern phenomenon that has given way to a set of contemporary artistic practices and another genealogy of performance practices that does not stem of the European avant-garde of the last century, but rather from these various experiences of displacement and dispossession. The quote unquote found origins, or rather foundations of which can really be found not so much either in Europe or in Africa, but rather in the Middle Passage, which of course, as was theorized by Paul Gilroy, is one of the greatest vessels, quite literally and figuratively, for that counterculture of modernity. So, having said that, introduce you both to New Orleans, which has been the context from which I have developed my work, and this aspirational linkage between the circumatlantic on the one hand and the Pacific Northwest on the other hand, through the figure of the Mardi Gras Indian, that dual surrogate figure for the native population of the Americas and its diasporic African population. I will pause, and I hope our friend is here, screen my first short, so as to further situate us now squarely within the context from which so much of my curatorial work and critical writing has originated. And, you know, this lecture is the occasion of somewhat of a retroactive theorization on the work I have been doing for the last 10 years. So this video that you will see was shot 2 years ago in the Trinidad Carnival, but it is an introduction for that work that I began to do in 2008. So it's an after the fact introduction to what I have already quite fully, well, not fully, but developed quite extensively. So it's not very long, and I hope you enjoy it. And sorry.
The celebration of freedom
Sorry.
is specifically directly rooted to our
Sorry. I will start from the beginning.
At the root of it, Carnival is about the celebration of freedom. It's specifically directly rooted to our celebration of emancipation.
The street represents a free flow of energy. The place where people contended in order to say we belong and we own this space is the street.
Carnival has always been an integral part of your experience of how you see here, you know, whether you are participating or looking, it's part of what I think defines Trinidadians in a lot of ways.
Carnival is a ritual, Carnival is a festival, and Carnival is also an art form, which is really what interests us here. Because, you know, as a contemporary art curator and the artistic director of the opening ceremony of the Fine Art Forum in Miami Beach, the Trinidad Carnival has been at the core of my work in that genre. And I really want to share with you the experience of Carnival in all its multifaceted dimensions. There's mass, which is the art of masquerading, costume making, and character portrayal. There's also pan, which is the percussive and melodic instrument that we usually know in its orchestra form as steel band. And finally, there's calypso, which is a lyrical song tradition used for social commentary. It's evolved into soca, which is jump-up music, and which is what people will play their mass to. That's how we say that we're doing Carnival here. We say to play mass, and it means all of these things. But most importantly, I also really want to introduce you to some of the key figures behind the contemporary artistic development of this unique Caribbean celebration.
My name is Etienne Charles. I'm a trumpet player, percussionist. The core of Carnival is about community. It's about people coming together to celebrate and express. So you use the arts, of course, because the arts is the highest form of communication between people.
I'd love to hear you speak about extemporizing, which is a key feature to the art of the Calypsonian.
Well, extempo that's the improvisation element, and that's key. Before there was calypso, there was extempo. It's about navigating the actual situation as it came, telling the story within art.
My name is Wendell Manwaran. No, Carnival is about viscera and gut, and you should feel something. My mission has always been to try and understand this thing that we have inherited, this carnival, this special time. The carnivals that exist all over the place, but for some reason it still resonates very deeply here. Why is that? Trigonal is arts and Juve collective. We've been in existence since 1990.
So about this, we did preload it.
Trigonal is arts and Juve collective. We've been in existence since 1990.
Uh-oh. Shall I just go over?
Trigonal is arts and Juve collective. We've been in existence since 1994, making Juve bands.
Sorry, because we are also transporting mud up, so that's why the driver is calling. My name is Che Lovelace, and I'm primarily a visual artist.
It's Juve minus how many hours? Where's Juve minus
Like 8 or 10 hours,
8 or
maybe.
10 hours, yeah.
It's coming up.
Do you think that people remember that Juve means daybreak?
I hope so. I hope they do, because it's it's the definition.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the opening day, right?
Yeah,
The opening day.
opening of the day.
Juve has always been something that has been, emotionally powerful to be involved with, a sense of grounding you in the experience of being Trinidadian and being in a particular place at a particular time.
Juve is the beginning of the sacred ritual of Carnival that we have inherited from our ancestors. And it is the beginning. It's where you strip away everything and you get back to an essence, from mud or oil or any kind of pigment, something that transforms you into a whole other being.
Looking at it from a distance, you may not think that is that interesting, but the more you think about it, it's kind of strange, and wild, that this amount of people would want to come out, in the wee hours of the morning, adorn themselves in oil or mud.
Can you give us a sense of what's going to happen on the road? I know we'll be there.
Well, the road is us and thousands of other people. I like to call it the theater of chaos. So it's like how you create some kind of discipline and order in the middle of all this chaos. And a lot of it is just trusting. If we find people come to us and say, "What's the route? Which way we're going?" It's like, we're going that way, down the road. Just follow, just trust, just lead. And then when the sun comes up, you'll feel the difference. And then you head back to base and you wash off and you love up and everything is all good and you go and you play the rest of your mass.
They portray the artistry of imagining what actual hell could have been like. They are portraying something that no one can ever actually say they have seen.
From the point of view of masquerading, I think I've been playing Blue Devil now maybe about 6 years.
So, Che, this is one of the paintings you're working on right now?
As you know, Blue Devils are quite an intense character with lots of wild movements and noises, but strangely charming in a way, The choice of the type of blue for me, in this kind of area feels like that blue color that we use on our skins for Blue Devil. The movement, like I said, came from an actual movement that I would have made.
Yeah, who I am. I don't know who I am, so. Yes, my name is Tony Hall, and I'm a playwright I'm sitting next to Cecilia Salazar, glorious actress that she is.
No, it's incredible how you're building upon this inter-Caribbean history, which is so little known and yet speaks volume to who we became as a Caribbean people.
I've been thinking about it for a while that I should be working in what we call the Grand Caribbean and not just English-speaking Caribbean or just Trinidad. One of the things about the Caribbean is that the Caribbean still embraces a kind of medieval world, even though the world has moved on. And I think that is why this Caribbean Carnival is so popular around the world, because it's still holding on to human contact. The world has moved away from that. Caribbean can show the world something about being human in that way. And I think that's the reggae is one thing, the Rasta thing and reggae, but also the carnival, the diasporic carnival.
Peter Mintz was a genius, full stop. He took a boko jumbi, which is a stilt walker. He created the illusion of a ballerina on point. That's pure mass. So he took all of these things, but then he made it trendy.
Please, stop saying I am the genius. The real genius comes in the performance. The swan crosses so many barriers. It crosses male-female barriers. It crosses black-white barriers. He is the only male dancer ever of his time to have gone on point. Nobody else on the planet would ever have thought to put ballet shoes on a Moko Jambi. It had to be somebody from the Caribbean. I tell you, the gods are in charge.
I mean, you could go Monday and Tuesday, you'll see thousands of people with feathers and beads on, and for them, that's carnival. And that's a beautiful feeling, to have that feeling of freedom.
I guess that's why I've always been interested in finding out what the essence is and bringing that forth as much as possible. While still, as I say, we live in contemporary times, we live in now times, so you have to find a way to turn that into a product that you can sell to people, that people can respond to.
Marshall McLuhan said that art is whatever you can get away with. I think mass is whatever you can get away with. Simple as that.
Carnival is an art. It's an art that incorporates all of these different elements, but it's really all one thing. It's carnival.
In our context, from the time you enter that arena, is like, get loose one time. That's what this time is about.
Now that you've seen it, aren't you happy?
I have to say it's great to look at this with you and realize in this particular context how much it holds the keys to so much of what I have done, including that which is problematic. And to give you a brief context, as I said, this video is only 2 years old. It was shot 2 years ago by, sponsored by Fine Arts, which is this organization for which I was working for a processional performance event in Miami Beach for the launch of the new organization. And it was a great opportunity to be in Trinidad at Carnival time and to have or to pursue or present to you guys, for instance, tonight, these various practitioners, a musician, Etienne Charles, Julius Train, the Guggenheim Fellowship recipient, Trinidadian, They're all Trinidadian. Che Lovelace, who you saw as a painter, but really he also is a performance artist, even though he is more closeted about it. Wendell Manwaring, who is a singer and the leader of a boys band very popular in Trinidad, and also the leader of the Juve Mass Band, a performance collective. Tony Hall, who is a playwright, and then finally Peter Minshall, who of the five really is a carnival artist. And the piece you saw, The Dying Swan, Ras Nijinsky in drag as Pavlova, is one of the more recent mass work he did. I've been in conversation with these various sets of practitioners who, across various disciplines, have been looking towards Carnival as a place from which to ground their work. Further, they have been instrumental in letting me on the path, on my curatorial path, in terms of reconceiving of the kind of curatorial methodology that could afford me the possibility of actually showcasing their work, which is not fit for the gallery space or the black box for that matter, but rather, I wouldn't even say to the streets, but to the road. And it is Wendell Manwaring who uses this very precise vocable of the road. And the road in term is that based upon which a great artist and art critic, Christopher Cozier, coined the term roadworks. He coined the term specifically as applied to the work of Peter Minshall, saying, well, a few things. One is that in the Caribbean, we may not have monuments, but what we do have is the people. The people are our monuments, something that Lorraine O'Grady in Art Ease would not have been against saying herself. If you know that performance of hers, it is the one that she did in Harlem, framing the crowd of the African American Day Parade with frames, rather traditional gilded frames, and in saying art is ... she means art is the people, and it is meant to be on the road. This is our turf, and roadworks are our mode of expression. These vocables are important, and mind you, Christopher Cozier was coining the term and theorizing upon the art of Carnival as a performance form back in the mid-80s. These terms are important because they begin to give you the tools thanks to which to write critically, thanks to which to write art historically, thanks to which to provide a context through which to understand Carnival, not just as a folkloric handover from Europe or as an anecdotal popular practice from, brown people, down in the islands or down at the bottom of the United States, aka New Orleans, but in fact as a continuously existing practice of performance in a mass dimension, of the masses, for the masses, if you will. We can update these terms. We can speak of the multitude if we wish to be more political and refer to Hart and Negri, who, as you may know, for those of you who have read Multitude, devote a passage to Carnival and the Carnivalesque, mind you, through the lens of Bakhtin, but nonetheless recuperating these emancipatory energies, etc., etc. So both the acquisition of a specific terminology and following the way of the artist is what has been at the core of my interest and devotion to my decade-long practice within the genre of processional performance. Another handy expression, which I did not actually coin, which does exist, is actually typically used by historians of the European Renaissance and the Middle Ages, which you may recall how Tony Hall somewhat problematically says that the Caribbean may not have moved from medieval times. That was maybe a little unfortunate. But what he did mean by that is that to be very schematic, some of the alienated processes through which modernity thrust all of us actually have not gone to the core of these continuously existing communal practices that have been recreated within some of the diasporic population of the Americas. And so processional performance, roadworks. of roadworks and wandering artworks. And I will proceed and tell you more about what I mean by wandering artworks as we continue proceeding. For now, I want to take care of the image that is on the screen right now, and which brings us back to the very beginning of my rather experimental practice within the genre of processional performance, as I did not call it thus at the time. So it's kind of interesting because, again, the introduction that I gave you is 10 years older than the actual experiments, and yet it is really within this particular community of artists, specifically in Trinidad, and specifically within the Trinidad Carnival tradition of masquerade, that I have begun the work I have been doing for the last, near decade. What you see here is Spring. It took place within the 7th Gwangju Biennale, which back in 2008 was curated by the artistic director of which was Okwi and Wizor. Okwi was the first among my peers and colleagues to understand the portent of carnival within the discourse and practice of performance, and also within the various modes of public address within civil society, which is certainly a terrain that he has been very interested in, if not specifically within the genre of performance, which he has otherwise not particularly dealt with. But in any case, Okwi gave me the first opportunity to think of the processional as an exhibition in motion, or rather, as I think of it now, again, retrospectively, as the diasporic articulation of the curatorial. And so I will show you a mix of further images of the actual artworks within the performance, but also some background context, which will play the role of indicating how my interest in these modes of public address has always been keenly related to popular movements and within their social and political dimensions. So for instance, what you see is the culmination of Spring, Spring being a code word both for the Gwangju Spring, of which I will say a little more in a minute, but also of couple of years prior to the Arab Spring, highlighting that very season, which somehow historically has been that has been catering to various forms of popular and political uprising. And so I was thinking as much of the Praha uprising or May 68 as I was of very specifically the context of the May 18 democratic uprising. So Spring was a code word all-encompassing of that particular political context, if you will. And so what you see assembled are, 5 works by 5 different artists, some of whom I will introduce you to. In showing you the video, you may have noticed in some of the aerial shots a vast empty area. And this is known as the Savannah. It's former plantation ground. It's a cricket field, but it's also where I was going to say the Sambodro, no, that's in Rio, but where the stadium where the various mass bands compete is sited. And so in working on Spring, which was my first such experiment, I brought on board one of the very younger mass men that have come of Peter Minshall's mass camp. And he is the one who helped choreograph this particular project, bringing with him in Gwangju the cultural memory of the savannah. And you can see, the circularity of, the very location where the project took place, but also where the student uprising took place back in the 1980s, well, in 1980 very specifically. And the reason why it's important for me to highlight it is that it begins to tell the story about how, in looking towards other cultural traditions, we may find other methodologies for creating performance, and that it does not haphazardly happen. And so, for instance, as I am being called upon to organize, such events in various contexts, I realize that sometimes, people's understanding of what a processional performance might be is, throwing a bunch of costumes on people's back. And because it is, as you may have now gathered, or as you may have known all along, much more than that, it's important for me to trace the genealogy that give an indication as to how we are standing, for those of us who care to look tangentially outside of the white cube or the black box. We're standing upon a set of resources that we're not utilizing either for our artistic practices or through our curatorial methodology. And so it's very important for me to ground the work I have been doing culturally in terms of a very specific set of resources, if you will, that have gone much further their initial site locatedness, if you will, which is just another way of saying that all too often, certainly in the canonical history of performance, a certain set of very specific cultural contexts, such as typically a European context, pass for universalizable, whereas in fact they are only but a set of resources that have been using time and again and keep being replicated, whereas really there are other contexts available. That's for that. And when I was telling you earlier how I very much followed the direction of the artists and their practices, and that's just, as you can see, everything is properly labeled, hopefully, so that which I do not get a chance to tell you about verbally, you can read on the screen. But that is, and it was unintentional of me to actually, I was not attempting to reenact the May 18 Democratic Uprising, but it so happens that this is where the project took place, and it is actually quite striking to juxtapose both these images. I was telling you how I really thought of my work at the time, back in 2008, as being at the service of artists who may be known for a set of practices in various media, ranging from painting, installation, you name it, any and everything, but who would also have this rather discrete performance practice within the site of Carnival itself. Case in point, Jarbas Lopez, he's represented by a Gentil Carioca in Rio. I first came into his acquaintance in New Orleans, where he was curated into one of the first exhibitions that Dan Cameron, the then director of the visuals department at the CSC New Orleans, curated. And, you will see Jarbas's installation and sculptures in gallery spaces, in museum spaces. But he also had a little video that he was kind of half hiding, and which showed an earlier version of this project, which he had done in the Sambodromo in Rio de Janeiro. I don't know that there are actually many curators who would have known what to make of this project outside of that particular context, at least maybe not within a field where artists continue to seek recognition, even as they may also seek to step out of the art world. And so, again, this piece, which I recurated, if you will, within the context of the Gwangju Biennale, was originally made within the context of the Rio de Janeiro Carnival. Likewise, Karen Olivier has been very much inspired by the Blue Devil traditions. You may recognize the blue of some of the Blue Devils you saw in the video. And Karen Olivier, as you may know, is well known for public art projects. She hadn't necessarily worked with movement and performance. This was her first such opportunity. Mario Benjamin, for those of you who may know him, is primarily known as a painter. He is Haitian, based in Port-au-Prince, and he also had been doing projects in Carnival in Port-au-Prince. And so this project is also somewhat of a reconfiguration of this project within the format of a exhibition in motion, if you will, as a mode of public address within the context of the Gwangju Biennale. And just two more of the artists who were part of this first processional performance project, Marlon Griffiths with Runaway Reaction, and finally, French artist based in Hong Kong who had been looking at Southern Chinese funeral processional traditions and also done this work rather discreetly outside of the sites of art where they would otherwise showcase other types of work. So, if you will, my first impulse was to provide a curatable avenue for these various works to exist, very simply. And unsurprisingly, and the black slide is intentional, and unsurprisingly, my first projects took place within the context of international contemporary art biennials, of course, festival-like, more suited possibly to outdoor events, but also, and more importantly, actually, keenly related, and by which I mean biennials, are keenly related to Carnival itself. If you think of the grand dame of all biennials, the Venice Biennial, which, as you may know, the first edition of which was in the very late 19th century, yes, in 1897, I believe. The Venice Biennale was an attempt from a successful one as that, the local bourgeoisie and aristocracy to give Venice again the appeal it once had when its carnival was one of the main festivals of Europe. So the very invention of the Venice Biennale is actually related to that longest standing history of Carnival. So that's just as an aside. And so I find that which kind of brings us full circle in terms of thinking of all these different modes of cultural production and exposition which we have forgotten and kept in the backdrop of so many of the so many possible ways of producing and presenting contemporary art, particularly in its performance dimension, which is becoming mainstream anew, as you well know. So another project I created also within the context of the biennial, and that time the second and last edition of the Cape Town Biennial, was A Walk into the Night. A Walk into the Night took place in 2009. It's a project that was older in conception than Spring, which had occurred a year prior, but only took place the year after. It was a much smaller scale project, only 100 participants versus twice as many in the case of Spring. And it was also keenly related to the local cultural context, even as it sought to appeal to much broader conditions of dispossession and diaspora and migration, including inner migrations and very specifically the history of forced removals at the beginning of apartheid, when coloreds, as they were then and continue to be known, were removed from the city center and forced into what became the township. Cape Town has a carnival tradition that the colored have been furthering. And we worked, the main artist, Marlon Griffiths, it's a name that is recurring within my project. We worked together on this project, and he conceived of this walk into the night as a symbolic return of these colored population within the very center of town from which they had been expelled and continue to be missing. The site for the performance were the company gardens gardens, meaning the very gardens surrounding the building, the headquarters of the East India Company, which was responsible for the slave trade in this part of the world. And it's all this embedded memory, if you will, that forms part of these projects. There's another, and in working on my presentation, I couldn't get my hands upon my own personal images of the Cape Town Carnival, which was known as the Coon Carnival, and it's too long for me to kind of go into this, but that was the name of the Cape Town Carnival. I couldn't get my hands onto my own photographs, but it comes from a tradition of minstrelsy. And the traveling minstrel shows that found their way from the Americas to Cape Town, actually, in the late 19th century. Long story short, these minstrel shows, of course, and thence the origin of the Cape Town Carnival is very much rooted within derogatory representation of race. And so with this shadow play in motion, what the artist was thought to do was to issue precisely the epidermic identification of human beings with skin color. So the shadow was meant as a veil through which to brought this population back, minus the stigma of race. And there's much more to it through these various figures, but I will continue carrying on to give you an overview. I will carry on, and before bringing on another point I wanted to make, but also to show you how in working with Carnival, not so much as a theme, as much as a curatorial methodology, I did not simply thought to follow the way of these artists for whom it had been an important source, or for whom it is an important source of inspiration and location of and location for display, if you will. It was also a mean of suggesting how foundational this a civilizational principle it was, and also to indicate the arc of redeployment of the Carnival curve back into Europe. And so what you see here is my third project in Göteborg, Sweden, within the context of yet another biennial, the Göteborg Biennial, its 7th edition. And even as I was probably looking forward, stepping away from a carnival as a context, it found me back. For there is a history of carnival in Göteborg that speaks to the various, not so much Caribbean, but Latin American groups that have migrated to Sweden, and who through a carnival have found a site through which to carry out cultural practices and artistic projects. So who you see is the New Beauty Council, a queer activist group that has been repossessing carnival as a methodology for protest, very much looking towards, from their context, the Bakhtinian tradition thereof, which, as you may know, is that which is being recuperated by various anti-global activist movements, including Reclaim the Street, etc., etc., for those of you who know the history of that particular movement. And this performance was not just a spectacular display, as it may appear at first glance, but it brought together a set of researches that they had been doing in the demonstrations and protests that various Göteborg-based queer activist groups had been doing within this genre. So the language of the banners, some of the slogans therein, and most of the members of this particular performance stemmed of this group, which is otherwise Stockholm-based, stemmed of and was a way to create a living archive of an otherwise unknown a movement, that of queer activism in the city of Göteborg. This is just a little bit of archival material, which I brought to the fore in my essay for the catalog, where you can see to the left the very same plaza with the Poseidon standing, but that was the Göteborg Carnival back in the mid-80s. And a few of the projects that took place, including a so-called psychic attack done by the group Psychic Warfare, and another project on the river in Göteborg that had a lot to do with the title of the show, Anacru, an anti-archive, and you understand how I conceived of the processional as that ephemeral repository of archival material, maybe not so much anti as much as counter, possibly. And the term Anacru was a way to speak both of Carnival and the cruise, which is the New Orleans vocable for the Carnival bands, but also the history of anarchism and the way in which it is also very much related to Carnival and to this anti-global corporate movement that is recuperating, if not Carnival per se, certainly the Carnivalesque as a theoretical framework for the action. And it so happens that Roberto Per was very much that connector for all of these various strands of Carnival and the Carnivalesque, having done a lot of research in the Caribbean and appropriated some of the aesthetics of traditional masquerading and parading outfits. So that's what you see here. I told you how my introductory video was both a means to highlight the particular context that has inspired the work I have done, the context and the contenders therein, the petitioners of Carnival in its modern incarnation as a potent performance art form. One of the way in which it proves problematic is or two of the ways in which it proves problematic is that on the one hand, it seeks to appeal to reclaiming of the streets, an occupation of the road, and therefore to want to escape the site of the museum. And on the other hand, it also seeks to reclaim artists within the frame of art, for this is indeed the way in which they conceive of these particular practices. And the problematic dimension of this dance between the road work and the artwork, if you will, came to the fore with an invitation that was extended to me in the heart of Empire, in one of the sites where it all began, and that is London. And as you may see here, the Turban Hall and at the Tate Modern. This project took place quite a few years further down the road in 2014 at the invitation of the Performance Art Department within the context of the so-called BMW Tate Live series. And it was the occasion to bring a few of the artists whom I had been working within this museum context and to step back and wonder if that was indeed the place, after all, where the work should reside. And so, you know, halfway through my experimentations with processional performance, was it not ironic that it would find itself folded back within the museum context, if not the exhibitionary complex? For after all, it was not a gallery space, at least not a traditional one, if you will. Uphill, downhill, which a punning title, appealing to the origins of the Notting Hill Carnival back in the mid 1970s, was an attempt to bring further to the fore the way in which Carnival, of course, can contribute to the discourse of performance, but the way also in which the processional can be a curatorial vehicle. Both aspects, the importance of Carnival within the discourse of performance and the processional as a curatorial methodology, the curator who invited me had understood. And so it was my mission with this particular project to bring it into light. What you see on the screen, as most of my introductory slides, is not the beginning, but rather the end and the culmination of the performance. In this case, you see the final movement of the work of Hugh Locke, Give and Take, about which we will see further images. You also see hanging from the ceiling from one hand of the Turban Hall to the other, a work by the architect G.R. Wolfe. This is important to me because, again, in much the same way that it was important for me to remind you of the Savannah, the location of the Carnival Stadium in Trinidad, and the way in which the particular set of artistic practices and cultural memory that is embedded in that space and that has become the active knowledge of its practitioners. It is important for me to point out that when faced with the monumentality of the Turban Hall, my first curatorial impulse was to think spatially about that space as a performance space. And I was reminded of I'm a little out of order in my slides. I was reminded of this space, who some of you may recognize, which is none other than the Sambodromo in Rio de Janeiro, the Carnival Stadium that Oscar Niemeyer designed, and which, if larger, is likewise, of course, processional, and somehow, to me, reminiscent of the Turban Hall, only that the Turban Hall, of course, is covered. Interestingly enough, in-house referred to as the street because of its monumental dimension. I'm highlighting this because, again, I want to show how a different set of cultural references can prompt different types of curatorial methodology. So further, I also want to point out to a certain set of intertextual or interspatial or intercuratorial or interarchitectural references. Namely, the Turban Hall, as you may know, was redesigned, or adapted architecturally by Herzog and de Meuron, the Swiss architect. Little might you know that Herzog and de Meuron have a background in the Basel Carnival. In fact, they facilitated one of Joseph Beuys's protest action, which took place within the Basel Carnival in the late 70s, to protest against the condition of acquisition of one of his works, Feuerstate. Again, I think it's in the late 1970s. And Herzog and de Meuron, who were then buddies studying their architectural practices, facilitated Joseph Beuys's project. I just find it very interesting when you start kind of digging through the history, how much Carnival finds itself to be a point of convergence for various artistic practices, or in this case, even an architectural practice. Which brings me back to, no, I think we still want to see this inaugural image, in the sense that this was one of the first works that streamed through the Turban Hall. So in telling you that I sought to address the monumentality of the space and intervened indeed spatially, I reached out to an architect, G.R. Wolfe, who had come to my attention because, as a Harvard GSD graduate, she had been granted a research prize, the Wheelwright Prize, in order to conduct research, the title of which is thus Floating City, the Community-Based Architecture of Parade Floats. She's developing most of her work in Rio de Janeiro and rethinking urbanism through the lens of the temporary buildings, i.e. the floats, that reconfigure the cartography of the city at the time of Carnival. Interesting, isn't it? That you would find Carnival at the heart of contemporary architectural practice and discourse. And this is the set of intercultural references that I'm playing with as a contemporary art curator in a space such as the Turban Hall. But moving on, and also because I have another shorter video to show you that speaks, which is kind of a documentation and interview of the artist in the project. You find, once again, Marlon Griffiths. You've seen at least 3 of his work in my previous project. And I won't need to explain the work out to you because the artist will take charge of it in this short video. One of the things that I think Hugh Locke does not address in the video is this particular motion, which is important for me to highlight, which you see also here. And that motion is known as kettling. For those of you who go to protest when the police wants to kick you out of the street, it will proceed to use its shields in order to corner you in any possible way and force you out and away. And this is the choreopolitics that Hugh Locke was reappropriating within his piece, Give and Take, made of these shields onto which were reproduced facades of the Notting Hill neighborhood, long gentrified and resistant to the continued existence of the Trinidad Carnival and of the presence of its black masqueraders in its midst. But I'm going to pause and bear with you another shorter video documentation of this project, an interview with the artist. And I am... No, not here, forgive me. Oh, you're not, I'm not live, okay, great. I hope I didn't close my tab. Please bear with me. Take me just a sec. Is everybody following me? Yes, good. Thank you. Sorry. I hope it won't stop halfway through. I had kind of pre-uploaded it, but then now I lost it, so I'm looking for it again. And there we come. Yes, here. We can go. Yes, live. Oh, there we are. And the sound, forgive me. Today, on the weekend of the Notting Hill Carnival, here in the Turban Hall, we're presenting Uphill, Downhill, an indoor carnival performance with a series of newly commissioned works by 5 practitioners who have a history of working with carnival as a medium and a form of public address. We begin with G.I. Wolf's Canopy, which takes us through the length of the Turban Hall, really emphasizing its processional nature. We carry on with the soundscape sonar produced by Dub Morphology, specific to the performance, but very much playing on the notion of call and response. Marlon Griffith's Snow Black in the Union Jack is composed of 60 masqueraders who are swarming space in a bird-like formation. Indeed, each and every costume represents a hummingbird, a very territorial and aggressive little bird that stands for Caribbean identity. A motif that the artist decided to use so as to indicate that the public is fighting back.
No Black in the Union Jack draws a lot of inspiration from my experience participating in Notting Hill Carnival here, but as well, most recently, the 2011 riots here that was started by the shooting of Mark Duggan, and really touching on the way people of not necessarily color, but people disenfranchised communities in London are treated.
Sky is Dancing. It's a very poetic intervention that also speaks to police surveillance in the form of ticket tape as helicopters. Locke is a well-known London-based British artist of Caribbean descent who has been very attentive to Carnival both in Guyana and in Notting Hill.
This is the first performative thing I'm doing. I'm directing it, I've come up with the idea, and I'm working with Batala Samba Reggae Band, and these are the guys without which this thing wouldn't be happening.
Give and take. Also working with the motif of the shield, responding to the state of police control and surveillance within the context of the Notting Hill Carnival, and further also commenting on the gentrification of the neighborhood, as can be seen on the motif of the shields, which really recreates the landscape of the Notting Hill neighborhood. Uphill Downhill really asks the question of who owns the street, but also who owns public space in general. Public space outside, in the streets, of course, but also within a museum context, such as the Tate Modern with the Terminal Hall.
Sorry guys, I didn't realize how pixelated and lo-fi this version is. But luckily you had clearer images beforehand. I'm going to pick up where I left off. And Mac, if you can help me with time, there's 2 more projects that I would like to go through. I can drop one if time is an issue. And if I have to do so, then let me pause for a minute. We're good. I will conclude with my last project. It is not my last in terms of the last that I have done, but the last that I wanted to show you. And it's one which, again, highlights this very tangle that I have not thought to hide from you, which is that of the difficult position in this intermediate space between the museum and the road as performed within the context of these various biennials within which I have been invited to present the work. The next project that I'm going to show you, En Masse, Carnival and Performance Out of the Caribbean, was a really ambitious, multi-year, multi-sited editorial and curatorial project. My colleague Krista Thompson of Northwestern University and myself undertook. The first platform, if you will, within which it unfolded was that of the various carnival and festival traditions of the Caribbean within which we commissioned the artists to do the work. It was really the confrontation within the actual original, so to speak, context from which the work stemmed, and a rekindling with said said communities to which and for which the work is said to be. And you do understand how I, of course, even as I present this work to you, build in what I hope to be a healthy, self-critical dimension. At this kind of juncture within my practice, where I am ever more interested, in fact, in doing the work, not in London, not in Göteborg, not in Gwangju, but actually right back in the Caribbean and in New Orleans. So in a way, this work is a motion towards a contention with these various spaces and with the discourses and practices which I feel to be more advanced for my purposes than those within the mainstream art world, which always put me in a position of resistance or countering, if you will. But as things stand, 2014, and I'm sorry the date is not on the slide, Krista and myself commissioned 9 artists, mostly of the Caribbean, to do work within their respective the respective cultural context from whence they practiced them. The 9 artists were Marlon Griffiths, who intervened in Port Spain, Trinidad, and he is one of the artists whose work you would have seen in all these other deterritorialized contexts. He was back in Port Spain. Well, was not easy. Beautiful piece he did, though, Position and Power. Too long to go through at length, but addressing a surveillance in Port-au-Spain, just as in any other major metropolitan city, specifically at the time of Carnival, with the figure of the overseer, which was both kind of an iconic of police surveillance, as I said, but also of forms of surveillance and control of the black body, dating way further back, and of course that is the slave overseer, or the plantation or the prison plantation overseer, as can still be seen up on his horse in the Angola prison penitentiary. So within this overseer of Marlon Griffith's position and power were embedded all these instances of modern and contemporary forms of surveillance. And the overseer is making its way through the streets of Port of Spain on the last day of Carnival, as the masqueraders are receding from the street. In other slides, you can see actually this counter motion of your masqueraders, much dressed, or rather undressed, in the same fashion as those who you saw in the introductory documentary, coming upon this strange figure. More to say about it, but in the interest of time, I thought to insert here the museological display of the piece at the Contemporary Arts Center, one which has been deemed problematic, and rightly so, but very much for me a continued interest in contending with the gallery space and the exhibitionary complex, about which I will say my concluding words. But just 2 more examples of the works that were presented here. The work of Charles Campbell's in the streets of Kingston, Jamaica, during their Trinidad-style carnival. Lots to say about this. It's not actually a practice that is culturally indigenous to Jamaica. Their popular practice is more within dancehall and junkanoo. Moving on, I actually like this slide very much because you see a street performer and a performance artist, and somehow it doesn't take much to identify which might be which, and why is that, and what does it mean to juxtapose them, and how might their respective agency do better the work of criticality than the other, which of the two. much more background to unfold, which I'll be happy to do afterwards if you're so interested. Inserted within the presentation the gallery presentation the artist chose, which was unlike his fellow artist Marlon Griffiths, did not so much want to resort to the language of costume on mannequins and of documentation of the action, but rather used one of the key motifs within the mask, this Buckminster Fuller-like faceted sphere. What is the name of... Thank you so much. Yes, geodesic globe, to use this object as the centerpiece of new work altogether that does not seek to be representational or referential, that thought to address the context of the museum for what it was, for the presentation of artworks dealt on its own terms, or presented on its own terms within an agreed upon set of methods of display, as opposed to, again, as in the case of Marlon Griffiths, bringing back the memory of the kinds of anthropological displays within which these types of practices have all too often been relegated to. And finally, a third work within this series of 9 that I wanted to show you is that of Ebony Patterson, who you may know, and I hope you also did know of some of the other artists whom I presented. If anything, the work I do is partly directed at increasing their visibility and your awareness of their artistic practice. But Ebony Patterson also intervened in the streets of Kingston during its carnival, a week before or after, I can't quite recall, a week before or after Charles Campbell, with this piece, Bling Funeral, Invisible Presence, which paid homage to the deceased young black men caught in the crossfire of inter-gang warfare, but also police repression within the downtown neighborhoods of Kingston, said to be unsafe, etc., etc. Each coffin was meant to symbolically represent one of the deceased. These coffins, as you can see, held upright, are very much placard and protest banners of their own, and yet they speak that language of the Bling Funeral, which is a way for these disenfranchised communities to assert their visibility even as they are about to cross the threshold of the afterlife. So the Bling Funeral is very much a Jamaican a tradition, in this particular case, used by Ebony Patterson in order to call attention to this particular phenomenon, critically through its spectacular and decorative dimension within the very site where the communities to which the work is addressed would gather at carnival time. The other reason why, and I'm coming to the end of my presentation and back within this tangle between the road work and the artwork, the reason why I wanted to end with Ebony's work is because, and much to her displeasure, but much to my pleasure, her work was plagiarized by Black Lives Matter Toronto. An artist working with Black Lives Matter Toronto went asking permission, which would have probably been granted to her, to, and this is what you see on the left-hand side of this Facebook shot of the artist protesting against the plagiarization of her work. Her work was utilized by this Black Lives Matter Toronto group within a gay pride sit-in, as it so happens. And much as the artist was upset by the infringements of, I'm not quite sure what, copyrights to begin with, I found it really, really interesting that this road work had actually been activated within the actual context of a protest march. And as you can see, you know, the coffins are a little quite shabby, and but all the same, they do the work which the artist activist intended for it to play, which was to visually and spectacularly call attention to the death within the black community, and also to act as that very surrogative object that is in many ways the very body of the deceased, which once departed can nevertheless be called into presence through these objects. And then there's a few other works, but I can go quickly. Actually, no, I won't, because I want to conclude with my little tangle between the road work and the artwork. So I will end with Ebony Patterson, actually. The other series of slides, there were just two more, Colleen Smith and Dred Scott. And we can talk about them, for the Q&A that may ensue. But to conclude, and wrestling as I am, between the road work and the artwork, I wanted to remind you and to go back where I began with my title, Road Work and Wandering Artworks. I wanted to remind you of the way in which in the chapter on the exhibitionary complex in Tony Bennett's The Birth of the Museum, there are a few sentences that I have pretty much memorized, in which Tony Bennett critiques Douglas Crim's on museum ruins, critiques Douglas Crim's assertions according to which to think of museums as spaces of containment would seem to suggest that works of art had been wandering through the streets, like the Sheep of Fools in Foucault's Madness and Civilization. To which I begin my own genealogy of performance practices and counter by saying, yes, works of art had been wandering through the streets, like the Sheep of Fools in Foucault's Madness and Civilization, in the streets of Europe, up until the end of the Middle Ages and further into the Renaissance, and certainly prior to the loss of the commons, the abolition, so to speak, of many of the communal practices that took place thence, that yes, works of art had been wandering through the streets, and that works of art are most definitely wandering through the streets or avenues or roads of the Americas in this modern reconception and reconfiguration of Carnival towards active ends. And maybe I can end there and open it up to questions about what these presentations of the merits of roadworks within the perspective of what once were wandering artworks might tell us about the contemporary. Thank you. Oh, yes. 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 Mm-hmm. 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 Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Oh, no, no, that's okay. I'm very happy to speak, and indeed I had planned to address his work. I suppose one of the reasons why I appended to my presentation of my previous curatorial practice examples of Colin Smith's work and Dred Scott. I could have added Simon Lee's. Of course, I could have added Colin Smith's more recent work on the Wake, which premiered at the Whitney Biennial. One of the reasons why I did so is because I said at some point how I had been retrospectively conceiving of so much of the work I had done and so much of this reconfiguration of the wandering artworks of old, the contemporary roadworks of now, as you know, as a diasporic articulation of the curatorial, which to me speaks of, and I have said as much in different ways through that presentation, these contemporary conditions of dispossession and diaspora that the various populations that have come to be located in the Americas have gone through, and might have to speak to those elsewhere in the world who are likewise under such conditions. In speaking of the processional performance as a curatorial articulation of the diasporic and of dispossession and dispossession and displacement, I am actually calling to the fore Homi Bhabha in an article that you may have seen on processional ethics, where he does very much articulate the practice of processional performance, thus as related to, as it turns out, the work of William Kentridge. That's another long story, but still very much speaking to my core topic. But back to Dred Scott. And in thinking about what I ultimately would like for the work to perform, which is a political aesthetics which, as you understood, has not been severed in communities like New Orleans, where the second lines and nomadic Indians, again, under the spectacularity and the seemingly distracting, colors of the costume, actually speak to continuously rooted traditions of community care and of safety and safety and sanctuary, if you will, the making of safe zones and of sanctuaries. Something that, as you may know, and I mentioned I could have, included in my presentation examples of Simone Lee's much recent work, sanctuary which museums are trying to become. And so for those of you, I don't know if I'm speaking totally abstractly here, but Simone Lee was recently invited by the New Museum to do a project, and she took advantage of her exhibition and of the residency that was attached to her invitation at the museum to invite black women artists for Black Lives Matter. And it very much spoke to the New Museum's stated mission to act as a sanctuary space for these artistic practices that are doing the work of addressing and including some of the call to action within the Black Lives Matter and the broader movement for Black lives. And so that's all good and well, but I have been thinking about the ways in which we might think of our sanctuary spaces as mobile, itinerant, migrant, much as our conditions of diaspora and dispossession might bring us to be in. What I'm trying to suggest is that I think of the processional, I think of processions generally as always already forms of migrations, if you will. And I think of our contemporary condition as one of impending dispossession, and one which may, sooner than we think, prompt us to have to take to the road And therefore, I am trying to bring within my practice this safe space, this safe zone, and this sanctuary, if you will. And that is the function that I see processional performance to do. And that is the reason why I am interested in those artists who are producing road works, who are contributing to what I see as the making of sanctuary spaces in motion, of sanctuary spaces. I want to think that we need to look into the sanctuary in our various forms of action. And for a set of reasons that I hope that by now, fluttering through your head as they might be, that you may begin to understand how I may have arrived to this provisional conclusion, given the way in which I presented my interests are very much anchored within a social and political, social awareness and political consciousness, and an intentional contextualization of my practice within a particular genealogy. But I'm happy to tell you more, but maybe we can do this, off the microphone, more about Dred Scott's work in New Orleans. It's likely going to become a film, actually, yes, shot by a very exciting British artist, and I will leave it as that. When I was telling you how my introductory video was kind of key to a lot of the work I do, it includes the way in which I presented today, which was on the mode of extemporizing. And therefore, I hope to have delivered if not enough, but critical information for you to be able to find your footing into this practice, which really, and I think that, Mark, you did a good job at highlighting, the conditions under which I did this work, which is very independently. A practice which I really continue to think as being left of center, even as it may have unfolded in the Gwangju Biennale or the Göteborg Biennale or at the Tate Modern for that matter. So I'm very wary of what can easily be labeled as recuperation, very wary of it, and nonetheless thinking that there is work that is being done, fraught though it may be, within this particular context that I am moving away from, as I was telling you, and as en masse began to indicate with the locations of the commissions that my colleague and myself chose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I very much was, yes, indeed. Yes. Well, it all depends also what we mean by appropriation. I am less concerned with appropriation as I am with dispossession and with being dispossessed of one's cultural heritage. Appropriation is actually, first of all, very common within popular culture and artistic practice. I mean, artists appropriate all the time. And I think one of the reasons why this work can be difficult to fathom is because it very much poses the question of the status of the art object. And it very much poses the question of the traditional, the modern, the contemporary, the ritual, the ceremonial, the performative, and I haven't, and as you understand, I do find a lot to be hopefully productively problematic. I haven't been thinking about appropriation in negative terms because to me it's an indication as to how alive and vibrant these practices are, that they would be then recuperated. What matters is the level of agency and autonomy that may be conferred upon those whose work is appropriated versus those who appropriate the work. But two more things. One is you said you're from Nigeria. Well, this is what Okwe reminded me of when very shyly answering his invitation to be one of the junior curators of the Gwangju Biennale back in 2008, I sent some random thematic exhibition idea because, you know, all curators have one such idea in the bottom of their bag. But I said, but you know, really, okay, what I want to do is this exhibition in motion. That's kind of how I called it then. I still had this very heavy kind of museum referent, this procession, blah, blah, blah. And much to my surprise, Okwe was first among my peers to say yes. And he explained this thus. He says, Claire, I'm from Nigeria. I know what a masquerade is. I know where you're coming from. I think I know where you're going. And I was just like, oh, well, I have no idea actually what I'm doing and how to do it, but fine. And so luckily, and this is why I tell the story of my friend, Anthony Molino, from the Calelu company in Trinidad, who came to the rescue halfway through to actually help me choreograph the damn thing that I really didn't know to do because I had been the bystander behind the camera, kind of dissecting, but not really having the knowledge to actually, you know, make it work. So that's one thing I wanted to say just as an anecdote. The other thing that I wanted to say about masquerading practices in Africa and the way in which we may wonder if, you know, the role that they have to play in contemporary African art, including contemporary African performance, well, quite a lot. And there is a Nigerian artist who is a very determined, active performance artist, Jalili Atiku. But I have been more interested in the work of artists from Benin, chief among whom Meshach Gaba. Why? Because Meshach, as you know, has been thinking about the museum. And well, there's two things. One, there's this ongoing project, the Museum of Contemporary African Art, which is trying to think that model in relationship to the sets of practices he knows not to be able to fit. That's one thing. But then the other thing, more exciting, or not more, but likewise exciting to me, are his series of works, the so-called Défilé de Perruques, processional performances. And it's interesting because I have come to think of actually a kind of an update on the Museum of Contemporary African Art is the Musée de la Vie Active, the Museum of Active Life, MAVA. And he has said about it that I can't quote him, but I also may not remember his words well enough to be able to convey them to you. but something which boils down to saying that the streets, the urban thoroughfares are the live museum, because again there's so many cultural practices that take place therein and that have embedded within them and coding within their cultural DNA what artists like himself are working with as artworks, if you will. So I have come to think of these works as not only the artworks, but also the container, the infrastructure for their own presentation, if you will. And that is what is exciting to me about this idea of the processional performance, and the reason why it's important for me to reframe it as a counter to the history of the exhibitionary complex, because the two have always actually been in dialogue with one another. It just so happened that we have allowed ourselves to follow one particular mode, one particular space of containment, as opposed to exploring all of these other avenues that, in my view, speak to a much greater set of cultural practices. I mean, if we are beginning to really take into account a global artistic production that takes place, to be very schematic, throughout Africa and Asia, actually, processional performance might not be a bad place where to restart. And I can speak of any numbers of artists from Eco Negro, working from shadow puppet theater tradition of Indonesia, Jompet Kuswinananto. I can think about Nawin Waran. I mean, I can think of any numbers of artists from Southeast Asia in particular, who are doing work within this particular genre and who may have little use of the exhibitionary complex. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. One of the reasons why I thought to myself, well, maybe I'm not so totally tangential to it all, is because this particular interest of mine that stemmed of a specific context met with the work of artists around the world who were bringing to emergence again what I by now was calling processional performance. And also for some very much in relationship with the museum and the history of the exhibitionary complex. I'm writing a book on processional performance, and my first chapter is about that relationship, and it begins with Francis Alice, The Modern Procession, in 2002, where he accompanies the copies of MoMA's iconic artworks as relics, as religious, relics to the temporary site of MoMA Queens. It continues with Simon Fujiwara's The New Pompidou, a project he did, a processional project he conducted in Paris in relationship with the Pompidou Center in 2014, maybe. It looks back at Paul McCarthy's Western Parade, which he did outside of Haus der Kunst in 2005. Particularly interesting when you know that Haus der Kunst was opened by a Nazi-style, military-like parade. And so I'm working through all of these kind of like global art historical account or genealogical, framing of the reemergence of the processional and asking, why now? What are the conditions of reemergence? There's of course Jeremy Deller also, who we may think of, etc., etc. So, I'm sorry. Mac is looking at me, and maybe he's trying to suggest that we need to bring this, what was all too much of a monologue and not enough of a discussion, to an end. So thank you guys, and of course I'm here. We can continue discussing outside, and I thank you very much for your patience with my extemporary presentation. Thank you, everyone.